The Vibecatch podcast brings you the latest in employee engagement, workforce productivity, and people analytics.
Hello everybody, this is Konstantin from Vibecatch. You're listening another episode from the Vibecatch podcast. Here today with me, we have Dasa Suisa. Welcome back, Dasa.
Thank you.
We've talked in previous episodes quite a lot about employee engagement, and we've gone through different aspects of the topic. What's the role of HR? What's the role of leadership? We've tackled also the mindset, why it's necessary to have an important mindset for approaching employee engagement. But what we've realized, meeting with and talking to several HR professionals throughout our career, was that there is kind of a lack of knowing where to start with employee engagement. And so I thought that in this episode we could actually look at practical steps that, for example, company X and Y could actually take to embrace employee engagement, to start engaging employees. And also maybe we can talk about who in an organization should take the initiative. Is it the HR role? Is it the leadership role? Is it a combination of? Is the joint conversation? And so, because there's a lot of information out there, and sometimes it's very difficult to say, well, these are the steps that I need to take, and is there a magical checkbox that we can take? So would love to hear your thoughts on that.
Okay, so I'll probably start by suggesting how you could start going about employee engagement. And I think that you need to start by building your own case, because your company, your organization is unique, has a unique dynamic history, organizational structure, and so on and so on. So you need to start by understanding where you are, and that means starting to gather some important data. So what I mean is that some data are more or less related to organizational performance. Like you can look into revenues, you can look into your, for example, EBIT, EBITDA, and so on. But also what I would recommend is to go into softer data, start gathering softer data, like what are the customer satisfaction levels, or what is the level of absenteeism, or what is the level of staff turnover. So these are all quantitative data that could be the first indicators of whether or not your employees feel engaged, because we know that all these data are related to employee engagement. So if you're not quite happy about some of these, a likelihood is that it might come down to low levels of employee engagement. Now, what I would also like to point out is that it is not just about gathering quantitative data. So, for example, going back to staff turnover, it is not just about gathering the percentage. Yeah, so you can find out that you have a 20% staff turnover, but you just don't know why is it that way. So it's also good to dig a bit deeper into the whys. So you need to start collecting qualitative data as well, by, for example, asking employees why they're leaving. So that taps into your voluntary staff turnover. By doing that, you are slowly building a base and a business case for you to potentially start discussing these results with the wider leadership team in case they are not yet quite on board with employee engagement, because this is probably the pathway to just initiating that conversation. This is something they easily understand. This is numbers talk, so that can create that bridge between the HR talk and the business talk. So that's probably where I would start.
Okay, fair enough. And I agree that that's the conversation should start with the solid data, in that sense. So you know what you're talking about, and that would be the short term, most likely the short term step to engaging employees. As we've seen, as we discussed in previous episodes, the mindset is one key component into basically steering the company in a different direction when it comes to productivity and employee well-being, and that is something that unfortunately cannot be changed overnight. Even if you have data for it, it's a process, and in many cases it's an individual process that starts with each one of us.
Yes, exactly. So if you are talking about the process of change that it means, then yeah, I absolutely agree. And it all starts with just creating awareness around where we are as a company and where we are as teams and individuals. And so if you are not aware of how things are, you can hardly change it. And that's often what I feel is underestimated. I see many companies jumping into action too quickly because they simply know that employee engagement is something they should be doing. But they forget about building their own case, and they forget about creating the very specific awareness around how things are in their unique circumstances. So that's why this is the very first step in that whole change process, like creating awareness. We know it from change management theories and practices. So this is definitely something not to be underestimated, and it's a large scale step. So depending on the size of the company, always multiple stakeholders need to be involved in that. So it's not just about HR sending an email about, oh, there we go, we've got that employee engagement initiative and these are the steps we will be taking. This is probably not going to work.
Most likely.
Yes. So, but how many companies do things like that? Still quite a few.
Quite a few.
So I always advocate a slower but more sustainable approach to things like that, because starting to talk about things and wanting to improve things like employee engagement, that's a change like any other change, and that means that we need to also follow the respective dynamic. And the first step definitely is just creating that sense of urgency that, okay, something probably needs to happen and this is why. So I show the data why.
Yeah.
And once everyone is on board with that why, we can then move to the next step of, okay, creating then a vision for what are we going to do then?
Exactly.
Yes, and communicating that vision, and that's yet another process, because getting that vision to every single individual in the company can be a process on its own as well.
Yes, and that's probably that has to do quite a lot with how well is internal communication done. How do you communicate the vision to everybody? What are the channels? Is everybody on board with that? Is everybody listening to you, etc.? So that's quite interesting. Because we got all these questions from, as I said, from HR professionals as such, and not knowing first of all where to start, or is basically if their organization is ready to engage employees. What we've done is we've created together with HR practitioners and academia, we've created a set of questions, basically, which is available on our website. By answering those questions, some of them with yes and no answers, can actually reveal at the end your readiness in terms of percentage, like how ready is our organization to actually start taking employee engagement seriously. And I think that came from a need that we've discovered, as I said, from meetings we had, from events we've attended, that everybody's talking about employee engagement, especially, oh yeah, we have to do something in our organization, but well, one, we don't know where to start, and two, we are not sure if everybody is ready. We might be ready as HR department, but
yes.
What about leadership? What about the other teams?
Yes, exactly. And just starting to gather the data and having reading, being able to see some patterns is the very thing that enables everyone to get on the same page.
Yeah.
That creates the springboard for any further work on that front.
So for our listeners, if you guys are interested in seeing how ready your organization is to engage employees, in the description of this podcast and on the landing page of the podcast, you can find the link to the landing page that we created especially for that, to the questionnaire, to the survey. And we're looking forward to hear from you in terms of how did you find that? Was that helpful? Give us some feedback, and definitely we're here to help with any questions you might have related to engaging employees, to your readiness, and maybe there's some gaps that we can help you fill in. I think this was quite interesting and quite practical for our audience. So thank you again so much for accepting to talk to us and taking the time to come to speak in our podcast. So thank you, Dasa, again. And
my pleasure.
To our listeners, don't forget to subscribe. Thanks again, and till next time.
Thanks for listening to the VibeCatch podcast. Visit our website, vibecatch.com, for more resources and insights on employee engagement, human productivity, and HR technology. Don't forget to subscribe to get the latest podcast right in your inbox.